Two writing errors that people often make are comma splices and fused sentences. And they have a lot in common. So if we look at the first example here, we read, apparently you can eat rose petals. We had some on our dessert the other night. When you read that aloud, you can hear that there's this big pause in the middle. And we call this here a comma splice. So this is a comma splice where we've put a comma between two separate sentences, and we haven't properly connected these sentences, let's say with a conjunction. So that's called a comma splice. The second example is basically the same, but now we don't have the comma at all, and we call this a fused sentence. So if you see one of these kind of abbreviations in your writing, if a professor marks your writing, let's say, then that's what that means. CS stands for comma splice and FS stands for fused sentence. You will also come across the term sometimes run-on sentence, and this one is a little bit harder to define. Some people use the term run-on for either of these two things, for comma splices or fused sentences. Other people use the term run-on only for a fused sentence, or sometimes just for any sentence that goes on for a little bit too long. We're going to ignore this term for the most part for now, but just be aware that you may come across the term run-on sentence as well. Okay, so the first thing to recognize then is that these are fairly common problems, and there are three ways typically to fix one of these mistakes. The easiest way is to put a period in. So number one would be add a period, and we can just stick a period right there, and then we would capitalize the next word. Another way to fix it, this is number two, is to add a semicolon. I wouldn't always do this though, because if you add a semicolon between two clauses that are not connected with a conjunction yet, you really have to make sure that these clauses have something in common, that they're fairly balanced, that they are of equal weight, and that they nicely go together like that. So only do it if you're sure that the semicolon would be a good addition. And then the third way to change things and make it proper is to add a conjunction. So if you can find a suitable conjunction that works, then that's great. In this case, you could say, apparently you can eat rose petals, comma, so we had some on our dessert the other night. And then so, if we stick so in here, so becomes the conjunction that ties these things together. So those are the three ways to fix comma splices and fused sentences. Now that we know how comma splices and fused sentences work, or rather don't work, I just want to observe a couple of things to end this video. The first thing is that if you have very short clauses, as in this example here, so please be seated, it's time to start, then it's probably okay occasionally to use a comma splice. So a comma splice is not always a negative thing. It's more common, for instance, in informal writing, if you're writing an email or a letter to somebody. In academic writing, you probably really want to avoid comma splices, but it's not as if the comma splice is absolutely taboo. So that's one thing to recognize, that with short clauses, sometimes that comma splice is okay. Second thing to recognize is that one of the most frequent causes of comma splices is the use of a conjunctive adverb. So however is one of these examples, conjunctive adverb. And we don't have time here to review all the conjunctive adverbs. If you go to the website, there's a separate section about that. But examples would be however, or moreover, or nevertheless. And I tend to think of these words as kind of the big conjunctions. They are conjunctions that don't tie together so much parts of the same sentence, but they tie an entire sentence to a previous sentence. And that's why what you need to do here is you need to put a period or a semicolon and start with a capital. All right, so however. Again, this is one of the most common mistakes that people make. If you were writing more casually, I suppose you could sometimes do this, but even then I would stay away from using a conjunctive adverb in the middle of two clauses to tie them together. So I refuse to buy gossip magazines, period, however, comma, and then we read to the end. That's it for comma splices and fused sentences. watch out for them. The best advice I can give you is just to read your sentences aloud, and then you often hear that there's something missing and that you need a proper pause.